Hello, everybody, and welcome to Winning in the Workplace. This is Maurice Velasquez. I am your host, and it is good to have you guys here today. We have a great show today. I have a great friend and a colleague in the studio with us. His name is Steve Mellor. He is a fantastic guy. So looking forward to introducing him to you guys. He's going to be talking to us about, well, first of all, he's a coach. He's an executive coach. He's a swimming coach, and he's going to tell us a lot about that. I'm really looking forward to having him here. All right, but first, before we dive into the topic of the day and then bringing on Steve with us, I want to tell you how to reach me. Okay, this is the Maurice Velasquez Show, Winning in the Workplace, and how you reach me is go to my website. We add new material every day, every week, really, every week. Podcasts, blogs, information, new resources, downloadable files. Reach me at mauricetraining.com. You can also, from that website, but also you can go to Winning in the Workplace. From the mauricetraining.com website, you can find my video library. And just click on Video Library and it'll bring you to Winning in the Workplace, but you can also go to winningintheworkplace.com. When you go to services, you'll see a plethora of great services that we offer. I'm not going to show them all to you here. I'm going to show you just a few number of them. First of all, our DISC assessment profile. Every time we start with a new client and I start helping individuals or as a teams, one of the early things we talk about is this DISC and personality. We don't take a similar approach like most people where you just do the survey and then kind of put it up after a couple of weeks. No, we really dive into how to improve our communications and resolve conflict and confusion and chaos and misalignment by first starting to talk about how we all have a preferred and a different style than everyone else around us. And so as a manager, you really have to know how to manage and how to facilitate conversations, decision-making, meetings effectively. But if you don't have a good handle on personalities and you don't have a good handle on the varying different personalities and the different styles that are out there in the workplace, then you're just always going to be left with what you can only bring to the table, and that's your own personality and your own style. So the DISC assessment is an incredible resource. I encourage you guys to get it. It's only, it's very inexpensive. It's $15, $20. You can download a sample of it so you can take a look and see what the results and the report looks like. All right, what we also have there is the actual Winning in the Workplace podcast. On this site, you can get all of our previous podcasts and announcements about the ones that are coming up. So make sure you go there. Again, you can get to this page by typing in winningintheworkplacepodcast.com. Also, on the website, you can go to one of our best video libraries here. It's called Management in Movies. It's actually one of my favorites. It's one of the most popular ones that we have out there. Let me show you some of the movies that we used for commentary to talk about leadership, management, conflict management, personality assessment, personality alignment, anything having to do with becoming a great leader and a manager. We use 15 to 20 different movies. For example, Moneyball, Life is Beautiful, Elf, Chernobyl, The Godfather. We have there Ford versus Ferrari, The Irishman, Apollo 13. We have a couple with Tom Hanks and Apollo 13, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. It's a fantastic series, and each module is less than 16 minutes. I think the longest one we have is 16 minutes. Most of them hover around the 3 or 4 minute area, but it's a fantastic series. If you enjoy movies and you like, well, if you just enjoy movies, who doesn't, right? Go log into the website, go to winningintheworkplace.com, get a free trial for 7 days, and watch the series. It's fantastic. It's all different types of topics, everything for personality, conflict management, how to hire, how to onboard folks, how to train them when they come on board, how to resolve conflict, how to lead meetings, which meetings should you have, which meetings should you have at certain times, and why and how should you go and perform through your people as opposed to going around your people. Anyway, it's a great series. It's a great library that we have out there. It's called Management in the Workplace, and you can find that at winningintheworkplace.com. All right, so the guest that I have, his name is Steve Mellor. He's a former Olympic swim coach. He's an executive coach. He's a keynote speaker, fantastic author, and just overall a great guy. We're going to be talking about several things, and we're going to be discussing his book and talking about what he calls creating the optimal self. Okay, he discusses that quite well in his book, Developing the Optimal Self Delivers Optimal Performance. You can find him at careercompetitor.com. All right, so before we dive into that, let's get started with the topic of the day. And the topic of the day that we're going to discuss for a few minutes is this, is that making improvements cannot happen by going at it alone. All right. Now, this has been an interesting dynamic that I have experienced a lot in the last 6-8 months. But for some reason or another, in the last 2 to 3 months, I have found myself having to explain that and showing the importance of that. For example, in the last 2 months, I've done about 5 or 6 different workshops or lunch and learns or entire courses on conflict resolution, conflict management, and how to help individuals not only get along better in the workplace, but actually collaborate better. But not just individuals, it's between departments. That often tends to be the next layer of conflict that happens in business. It's not just hard enough to help individuals become good at resolving conflict, but actually how to help departments get along better. If you've ever heard it said that we work as individual silos, if you've heard it once, you've probably heard it 10 times. I hear it all the time. It's the number one problem, but working between departments is a hassle here. It's very difficult. If we have projects that myself and my team can handle, we're really good at what you're talking about. But when it comes to depending on others, collaborating with others, having to get in teams with others, that's where things fall apart. And I'll be very frank with you. I've been here for 2-3 years, and I am now contributing to the conflict. And I asked him, I said, all right, so let me ask you this. Is there anybody in the building that's good at conflict management, conflict resolution, and figuring out where the sources of the conflict and how to find alignment? And that's the role of managers. Managers and the leaders have to be the ones that dive into the conflict and into the issues and help resolve conflict and help the team members learn how to resolve conflict themselves. The idea of managers diving into conflict is not to forever stay inside a conflict. It's instead to teach people how to resolve conflict in that workspace, and the managers are the ones that should be the best ones at this. But really, I think we're all facing a bigger problem, is that we tend to have the attitude that, you know what, I got it. I don't need somebody involved. I don't need somebody to come and help me resolve my issues. I don't need a coach. I don't need a therapist. I don't need somebody that's going to get in. And that tends to be the prevalent obstacle of why folks don't make the improvements, because they're trying to go at it alone. No sooner the individuals who are involved in the conflict tend to start they start crawfishing from the conflict and saying, you know what, it's not that bad, guys. Look, I got it. I'll talk with her. She and I'll get along. And yeah, you give that some chances, you give that some opportunity, and then 3 weeks later, 6 weeks later, we're back at it again. Okay. So although there's attempts to improve conflict, we tend to push people away from trying to help. Now, there's reasons for that. Okay, there's reasons why we don't like to have folks involved. One of them is it creates more confusion. Okay, the person that's coming in brings in their own bias, or they quickly dive into the issue, pick a side, or they lean on one side, and then you realize this person's not being a mentor. They're not being a facilitator. They're not helping to resolve anything. They're actually picking sides. And so that tends to be a really big problem. And so it tends to prolong the problem, and it tends to really create a lot more negative issues. So that's one of the reasons why folks don't like to have others involved. The other reasons probably the biggest obstacles is that we all have varying personalities that make it to where some individuals just like to avoid conflict. So they don't have a problem being in conflict, but when it comes to admitting conflict or actually resolving it, that's going to be bigger. So you know what? I'm just going to say it's okay. It's okay. So you tend to have conflict avoiders. You also tend to have what are called resolution delayers. Let's give it another 6 weeks. Let's give it another 5 weeks. And so that tends to just make the problem bigger because we're just skirting everything under the rug. And then probably the single most challenge that we have, and that a lot of folks don't realize, that a lot of us, me included, we tend to like conflict, okay? We tend to work better under conflict. We get the adrenaline rush. We also resolve things better by going through conflict. If we don't teach both sides how to reduce conflict and yet teach others how to increase conflict, in other words, the folks that like conflict, we need to teach them how to reduce it and how to learn to operate at a much more peaceful level. And those folks that are avoiding conflict, we need to teach them how to have conflict and give each other the necessary arm wrestle, if you would, the necessary fight, okay? But the reality is that some of us just do want a big conflict, and so let me show you what that oftentimes looks like.
So I bought this cheese here. It cost me $40 and there is a hair stuck to it.
Oh yeah, we can take that back.
Wait, what?
Here.
Oh,
Okay. Take this. Your next purchase is on us. Did you want to fight?
yes, please. I would like to have a little bit of a fight.
Sure.
Yeah.
Where's
So
your receipt?
I don't have a
I can't
receipt.
take it back without a receipt.
Oh yeah. Well, the name of the store is stamped on the cheese. Okay?
How do I know you didn't just beat up somebody and steal it?
Who does that?
You might.
Really?
Yeah, you look like the kind you might.
I am going to go on Yelp and I am going to give this place a scathing review. Scathing. I'm going to blow up the internet. I'm going to break it.
Oh my God, you scared me so much. Please
Yeah.
take our money. Leave the cheese.
Thank you. Thank you. Was that so hard? It's called customer service.
Fine.
Thank you.
Fine. You're so welcome. A lot of people really like that.
So I love that video, man. That's a hilarious. When somebody first sent it to me as a way of telling me, dude, I think this is you. They weren't trying to be funny. They were saying, look, this is you. And I'm like, yeah. The problem is I'm worse than that. I don't even give you the heads up that I want to fight. I just like to have a fight. A client one time said, hey, heads up. Remember, we've talked about Maurice's style. He likes to throw hand grenades and then backs up and watches the bloodshed, or the carnage. And I'm like, what? So man, how crazy am I?
I don't think you're crazy at all. I don't. I think at the end of the day, conflict is one of these things that you see it at all levels of competition. And at the end of the day, the workplace is a competitive place. It's a place where people are trying to win, people are trying to succeed, people are trying to make an impact. And usually with that type of an environment comes conflict. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. And, both sides are just equally negative. Those folks that just like conflict all the time and don't know how to bring it down. And those are doing everything possible to not avoid conflict. They're almost doing the same thing, but from the opposite extreme, don't you think? I sometimes have more difficulty coaching team members to learn how to fight, have avoided it all their lives, than to teach those that love to overfight to just tone it down. What are your thoughts? What's your experience been?
Yeah, my experience is certainly around that in the sense of, where is the conflict originating? I think a lot of the time we're trying to identify when you're the one on the outside, when you're the third party and you're thinking, how on earth do I coach this? How on earth do I actually get to the heart of this? A lot of the time you hear two sides and you hear a lot of story, you hear a lot of perspective. You don't necessarily hear a lot of truth and you don't know where the truth is. And you're trying to sort of get to the heart of that. And I find that a lot, even with coaching, is that that's on an individual basis too, is that when we have conflict internally, if we look at the heart of that conflict, realize quite quickly that turns out that a lot of the stuff that we're conflicted about, there may not be a lot of truth around it. There's a lot of story, there's a lot of perspective, there's a lot of idea, but there's not necessarily a big chunk of truth that if we were to have a conflict or we were to address conflict, you would like to believe that what gets discussed at the heart of it is truthful and is the type of information that actually happened, as opposed to, people having too many perspectives and stories and all sorts of opinions flying left, right, and center.
That's very true. That's very true. I think that's probably the biggest cause as to why frontline supervisors, managers, directors of departments, and the higher you go, that's why they tend to steer clear of conflict and then just dump it back on people and say, y'all need to figure that out. Because what you just described is the patience and the diligence of knowing how to dissect that conflict, how to create solutions and resolution as quickly as possible. And that takes time. I love some of the platitudes we come up with. One of my favorite ones is, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. And I heard a guy at a workshop say, dude, if I had a solution, I wouldn't bring it to you. Okay. Right. We'd go resolve it. Why bring you the solution if we don't have, and he was making a good point. And I certainly favor that. If we could just simply bring you the solution, why would we come talk to you? We've already solved it. You're going to get in the way. We need to come to you when we don't have a solution, when we're in each other's neck, we're in each other's face, when we're grabbing each other by the throat. And as managers, we know that takes so much time that we just tend to, you know what, you guys just need to resolve it. And then we shove it back down to their level. And then the problems just continue. So everybody, let me introduce you. Steve Mellor is an Olympic coach, a swimming coach. You work at LSU, is that correct?
I did. I worked at LSU for the better part of 8 years, and worked with a lot of SEC champions, All-Americans, and eventually U.S. Olympians and an Olympic gold medalist.
So all that comes from competition, and you're bringing it into personal self, right? You emphasize what's called developing the optimal self, right?
Mm-hmm.
I love your tagline, developing the optimal self, delivers optimal performance. And again, guys, go visit him at careercompetitor.com. And you've written a book, okay? Shock the world. Look, guys, great book. We're going to talk about it some today, and really, really good stuff, man. So tell us a little bit about yourself, okay? So you went from being a coach, and then your career. How did you go from one to the other?
Yeah, a lot of it was me actually at the heart of it as I started to replay over the years to see where I'm at today. A lot of it was what my tagline is with my company now, me prioritizing my optimal self, doing what I felt was right for me, not in a selfish way, but in more of a nurturing way. And so for me, when I looked at how I was once a swim coach, I always joke with people, I zagged while most swim coaches zigged, in the sense that a lot of swim coaches come from a physiological, kinesiology, scientific type background, and they really trust the science as they rightfully should. But for me, I always said, well, what's the gap? What's that 1%, 2%, 3% gap between exhausting the science, but then still becoming a champion? Like, is there a gap? Is there something that the science doesn't necessarily prioritize that can actually close that 1%, 2% gap when it comes to elite performance? And I found that's where I flourished, was the relationship. It was the ability to prioritize knowing an athlete in ways that sometimes they themselves wouldn't even know themselves. How do you get to know someone on that deep of a level to where you can start to anticipate how they're going to respond to certain situations, and you can get ahead of it. You can start to actually prepare them and yourself as the coach to ensure that come the big competition, the big moment, you can tell them what they need to hear. But in addition to that, I was building a podcast on the side, which was Career Competitor Podcast. I was building that on the side while I was being a swim coach. And before long, I built this whole network away from the world of swimming that I just didn't know what to do with. And the network kept inundating me with encouragement, like, hey, man, like, there's something here for you. Executive coaching, business coaching, whatever you want to call it. You have an ear for this. You have a perspective for this that is really sought after within this world. You should consider it. And lo and behold, I decided to take the jump back in the fall of 2021. And here we are now, 18 months later, talking about my business that's 18 months old, and executive coaching is now my day to day.
Which is great. We definitely need great coaches and great mentors out there. In my coaching, I find myself regularly, like I mentioned in my intro, referring to movies, because we connect with movies a lot. It's just modern day of, say, storytelling. And storytelling is bred into our human nature, right? We didn't create a Shakespeare for nothing, right? We've always loved plays since the time of the Greeks. And so storytelling captures us. Movies has become the easiest, best, most entertaining way to do that. So I use movies a lot, but I think secondarily, the one I use the most is sports analogies. And I get a lot of complaints about that. Oh, another sports analogy, but then again, it doesn't make sense. Sometimes you just have to say, one of my favorite ones is, okay, guys, we need to round third on this one. You know what I'm saying? And so everyone knows what that means. You coached at the Olympic level, right? I mean, we're talking about high competitive levels. You're helping individuals become better, and 90% of that is what's going on inside their head and what's going on inside of their heart, isn't it? And then you started this conversation with me today saying, well, after all, Maurice, the workplace is a competitive place. Mm-hmm. So you having had the years of coaching athletes in their physical competition, in the workplace, we don't tend to be that intentional about competition, but we're still facing the same things, aren't we?
We are. And it's all about how you frame competitiveness, competition. It's all about what lens you decide to look through in order to actually accept that competition is everywhere. Competitiveness is throughout our being, but we all just present it and show up with it differently. And then the sooner you can almost connect with the type of competitor that you are, the sooner you can really start to optimize performance. Because for me, if you are willing to accept on some level, even if you're resistant to the idea of being competitive, if you can actually address and accept the competitor that you are, you can really start to find some momentum with your career and with your performance. simply by knowing how to utilize your competitive characteristics. Something that you said before, in terms of just those sports analogies and the way in which we connect, you said like 90% of what a competitor does in the sports world is that thing between their ears. And there's so much truth to that. And I think in the workplace, we're almost guilty of not accepting that part of what we do. I think we do the work in terms of what we do in college, and we get our degrees and we get into trainings and we do all this literal work that we see in front of us, these qualifications that show that we're qualified for whatever it is that we're doing. But we forget that those decisions and those actions that we take each and every day, all of that comes from that place between our ears. And that place can be so easily influenced from one day to the next, simply because we are having to perform, we are having to show up, and we have some sort of way of being assessed for the way in which we show up. And all of that information influences that brain of ours between the ears and the mindset that we have towards the work that we do.
Yeah, yesterday I got a call from a dear friend, and he said, Maurice, I lost my job. And I do not like to hear that at all, and he had not been there long. And he said, the most frustrating thing, Maurice, is I think I saw it coming. I said, what happened? He said, well, I don't know. I don't know what I was thinking. And see, right there, I don't know what I was thinking. And he kept saying that. And he fought some things in his head that now he realizes, and he told me, he said, they wanted me to move a little faster. And I said, were they clear to you as to that? And they said, yeah, they kind of did. They did want me to move faster in these two projects that I just did not move fast enough. And I said, what was going on there? And of course, he went straight into what you're talking about. What was going on in his head? And at one point he said, yeah, I guess I talked myself slow. And I told him, you got to come to the podcast, I said, because Steve deals with that. So first of all, I got to tell everybody, I have to tell everybody, all right? When Steve and I first met, we were at a conference, and I think the people that hosted the conference kind of set us next to each other on purpose, Right. So we talked and we said, we got to get together, and we did. And we agreed that, hey man, let's show each other our stuff. You show me how you coach, and I show you how I coach. And so I went first. In other words, Steve basically said, you be my client and I want to do a couple sessions for you. Okay. And I was like, let's do it. And he said, now you make sure that you don't come pretending, bring real stuff. Little did he know that I was actually going to do that. Okay. I wasn't coming in with theory. I wasn't coming in with, I came in, and was I not a real client to you?
You were a real client. Yeah, I'm glad that I prefaced it the way I did, because I was like, don't come in and create some sort of story for me right now. I don't need to be entertained. I want to show you what I can do.
Yeah. And so we started the session, and Steve right up front, he said, okay, so just to make sure, this is real, right? And I said, dude, everything I just told you was real. And I have to tell y'all, the way in which Steve walked me through the internal webs and the internal stuff that I was already talking myself in the wrong. I normally talk and suck the air out of the room, but he was facilitating such a calm, awesome conversation that, look, that was like 6 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And my last 6 weeks, I've been able to make some better decisions because of how you walk me through understanding the cost of my concerns, some of my fears, what was holding me up. And you regularly said, I got to bring the optimal you out of you in this situation, right? So kudos to your style. Kudos to how you do it. Tell us a little bit about how is that you take somebody through that journey.
Yeah, I'm glad that you've prefaced this with your experience working with me, because I think it does actually allow me to quite quickly, in a way, introduce and explain what it is I do. And I always explain it in these three parts. It's that sitting down with someone and getting clear on where they are right now, where it is they want to get to, and then how comfortable they are to dive into that gap between those two things. And when you get clear on those three things, then you can start to actually approach each one of them with another three-pronged approach, sort of a 3x3 approach, if you will. And so each one of those areas of where you are, where you want to get to in the gap, I like to talk a lot about establishing truths, and we've talked about that a little bit here this morning already, getting more clarity with your vision, and then finally addressing the limitations that are preventing you from seeing all of this through. And when you hit each one of those with that same three-pronged process, what it allows you to do is it allows you to have some revelations. You notice a few things, you learn a few things about yourself that if you were not having the conversation, and this is what you were alluding to with your experience with me, if you don't have the conversation, you don't have the revelation. And so for me, that is what I love about this style of coaching. And that's the connection to my former career as a swim coach, is that my job as a swim coach was to almost be a detective. It's like, watch someone perform, watch them train. And when you're watching them at the elite level, the mistakes that they make are few and far between. But when they make them, you better catch them as a coach. If you want that athlete to be the success that they're trying to be, that's where you're being helped.
Because they're not seeing that, right?
They're not seeing that. They can't see that as a swimmer. They think they're doing everything the way they're supposed to. So as a coach, you have to be attentive. You have to be dialed into what it is they're doing. But on the flip side now, I almost consider myself as a detective within these sessions where I'm trying to catch key words, key concepts, key perspectives that you're sharing with me. I can potentially connect to a truth, that I can potentially connect to something that can help clarify your vision, and that I can potentially connect to a limitation that you're maybe carrying within you as well. Like that for me is now where I get to sort of serve in that almost detective type of way.
Well, I've not heard you, and many times we've talked, I've never heard you say that the idea of detective, but now that you're mentioning, yeah, I do, that's exactly what you were doing. I mean, I'm going to date myself, but if you were Detective Columbo, that's all he did. He just took notes and he observed and he watched for patterns, and then he'd ask questions, and when you started asking me some questions, you brought me back to some of the things I was saying, to some of the phrases I had been using. Hearing you say them back to me was certainly different than what I was saying, because I didn't hear myself say those things. I didn't realize I was saying those things. You were watching for those things that I was probably skipping over, that I wasn't seeing, and you were throwing it back at me to help me understand, okay, so why, and then, what's the cost behind that? So really effective, man. Really, really effective. At one point, I asked you, well, man, what's different than this than a therapist, right? Yeah. This almost feels, and so what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's a tricky one right now, because I think as the coaching world just continues to skyrocket, the big question mark that still surrounds it is, who are you to be a coach? What qualifications do you have, and all this kind of thing? And while there's some governing bodies that surround the world of coaching, they'll never even get close to the level of qualifications that you have when you go into the world of therapy. And I'm an advocate for therapists. I've had a therapist of my own for many, many years. I joke now with people that it's my brain massage that I get to have every month, the same way you would have a back massage for a bad back. So that's why I have so much respect for that world. But it's also why I can sort of pull from it in terms of my approach too, because I am very therapeutic in the way I go about my work. That doesn't necessarily make me a therapist. I'm just therapeutic in my approach. I like to be able to pull parts of someone and almost like double click on it and say, okay, how do we go a little deeper here? How do we go deeper again? Because my belief is there's something in here that we can pull out that can really open up everything else that surrounds it. And it actually ties in really nicely to what you were saying here with conflict too earlier. A lot of the time around conflict is that we have people that misunderstand one another, that aren't hearing the same thing, even though they're saying the same thing. They're not hearing the same thing. And a lot of that, the key in the work that I do is that how do I help someone hear what it is they're saying, but how do I help them move forwards? And that's the difference for me with coaching versus therapy. Therapy, if you need to stay still or go backwards for many, many, many weeks at a time, then you should feel as though that's a safe space to do that.
There's a place for that, right? I mean,
Sure.
There really is, because you need to dive in and dissect and dissect and dissect. And I mean, there is a healing process that comes through being able to see what happened last week, or what happened last year, or what happened 4 years ago when I hit these points of drama or points of tension. I think you're doing a great job of, we definitely do not ever downplay therapy, because without it, a lot of folks wouldn't go back to those roots that are the true causes of why they're behaving the way they're behaving today. Right. Yeah. But there's a difference. So what's the difference? You were heading that.
Yeah. And so for me, the difference with what I'm doing as a coach is that everything's on the front foot. Again, you talk about athletic terms like that. I love using that term. It's something I used all the time in soccer. And I know you're a big fan of the game too. It's just like, as you receive the ball in soccer, you should already be thinking about what's my pass going to be. You shouldn't be thinking about it when the ball's already at your foot. You should have already decided what you're going to do with the ball before it even arrives. And for me as a coach, my thought is always along that. How can I facilitate through my questions, through my active listening, through the commitments that we embody from session to session? How do I instill this concept of always being on the front foot and encouraging development, encouraging progress? Because I don't want to see people being stagnant when they come and work with me. I don't want to see us plateau for many, many weeks at a time.
So that's where the commitments come in, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Tell me about that.
Yeah, and you did your homework when we sat down and we did that. You said, I challenged you over the next few days. I want you to go away and I want you to implement one or two things that we've addressed here within this session. And lo and behold, you sent me a message a few days later that did this, feeling the effects of it. Thank you again. And, that for me, the commitments part is where I love with coaching too, in comparison to therapy. Therapy, it's usually when you close the door, you take everything that you covered in the session and you bring it back in, or bring as much of it back in when you come back for the next session. For coaching, I love explaining it like this, is that you may come to a coach to feel as though you have accountability within your life. But my job, in my opinion, as a coach, is to teach you accountability, is to help you implement accountability so that every time we meet, you feel as though you're taking greater ownership for the work that's taking place between our sessions. Like, that is where the work is done.
That's really why I believe strongly that every manager, anybody who is going to be promoted to a managerial position, everyone who's in management of any sort at any level, has to learn coaching, mentoring skills. And yes, it's a shameless promotion here. If you need a coach, okay, his name is Steve Mellor. All right. Fantastic. I usually don't like to use products that I don't test. I have test-driven Steve. Okay. He's put me through sessions. He's helped me out. And I want all of the coaches that I have helped in the past to learn how he does it. Okay. Because that one-on-one that is so essential in the workplace, this is where individuals just lack that connection. You talk to employees, I talk to employees all the time, and there's a distance, Steve, you know this, there's a distance, huge distance that exists between the employee and the manager. Like that, my manager hasn't told me how I'm doing in like 6 weeks, 2 months. I don't hear from them. I can't bring them my problems. I can't bring in my issues, and they have no one to talk to. Right. You know what I'm saying? So managers, whether we like it or not, have to become mentors. They have to become coaches, don't you think?
100%. And I think that part I was hitting on right there towards what I just previously said. Like, how do you, the big part of coaching is not the time that you spend with the individual when they bring whatever they bring to you. It's how you can instill some sort of action plan or approach to commitments where they're going to follow up with you, and they're not just going to come back to you and say, I still got this problem. No. You're instilling an ownership element here where the only reason they're going to come back to you is to tell you how they've taken on the conversation that you had, implemented change, and the results that they're seeing from that change.
And then you're going to ask me about it the following week.
Right. 100%.
I mean, so when I left my session with you, I thought, I think he is going to call me. I think he is going to call me for the next session. And sure enough, what happened? We agreed. Let's give ourselves a couple weeks, and within 2 weeks, you were asking me. So, hey, man, how did it go with? And you looked at your notes and you said, all right, it's kind of like items assigned. You said you were going to do this. Did you do this? And I was like, I knew I better have an answer rather than, oh, yeah. One of the most frustrating things is coaching somebody, and then 2 weeks later, and they go, oh, yeah. What do you mean? Oh yeah, you were supposed to go do this.
Right. And I also want to mention something just in relation to this theme of conflict too, that you opened up here with today. Is like, this isn't one of these things where if you do take time to coach and you do instill some sort of action plan, etc., they don't follow through with it, or they don't do what it is that they said that they were going to do. Well, firstly, you've discovered that they're human, and that's okay. But secondly, that's actually the most coachable thing, is when someone doesn't follow through. That's where coaching can be even greater, even more impactful. So leaders, don't give up at the first sign of someone not following through. Actually double down in that moment. Like, see that as a really coachable thing. Like, okay, let's put everything aside that you said you were going to commit to, and let's just talk about why you broke the commitment. Tell me why you didn't follow through on the conversation that we had, because maybe in that is even more effective coaching opportunities for a leader.
No, that's great. So having the patience to do that, again, I go back to, that's why managers today walk away from this. They don't have the patience to do that.
Sure.
So you having the patience to do that is excellent. So, hey, look, behind you, you have your book there. So shock the world. Tell me about this, okay? How is this going? I love it. It's a great book. Almost, I would say, 60% finished with it. Really good, easy to read. So talk to us about it.
Yeah, easy to read was a priority because for me, I wanted it to be for an audience of people with a similar attention span to myself. Let's put it that way. So easy to read. There you go, easy to read. But at the heart of it, the story was born out of my final chapter as a sim coach, where I took an athlete that was an unknown. His name's Brooks Curry. From being that an unknown to becoming LSU's first ever U.S. Olympian in a little under 2 years, we did that. And he became part of a relay with the U.S. team where that relay went on and won an Olympic gold medal. And so
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. And again, for me, that story is as wonderful as it was. I realized quite quickly when I thought about sitting down and writing about lessons and approaches that I took from that just through my 4 years at that point in my podcast, that I had all these other examples of people that had come into my life and shared stories with me on how they'd done it the exact same thing. They'd done it in their own respective world, and in so many ways fought the odds, proven their potential, and gone on and achieved things that very few, if any, would have expected them to go and achieve. So I pull from tons of stories from the podcast, people that in some cases you will never have heard of, and in some cases, you'll maybe be surprised who I've actually had on my podcast and who have had the pleasure to sit down and learn from. But at the heart of the book, it's a tool. It's an exercise book. It's a way for you to sit down and really work through some individual stuff. But the beauty of it too, Maurice, pertaining to yourself and the show, is that as I went through the book and finished it and completed it, I realized quite quickly it's a great asset for any leader out there too, for them to start seeing their employees through the lens of the very approaches within this book, getting to know them on a more personal level, getting to understand their mindset, getting to understand the way they approach the work they do. You can go through this book looking at it from two different lenses, either individually or in terms of how you influence others. But I'm really proud of it. It's going great. And I'm excited for it to just become something that is even more utilized within teams. I'm now doing 10-part workshops. It's a 10-part book. I'm doing 10-part workshops through the book now. And I've got a few new clients off the back of that, which is so exciting. Because for me, as a coach, application is everything. We've talked about that already. And the content of the book is great, but I want to see it being applied to its fullest. And, these workshops certainly are able to do that. So,
yeah. And I find that each chapter can be a standalone, like how you title him, Shock the Approach, Shock the Mindset, Shock the Habits. So if you want to use it as a resource guide to just tackle each one individually, that's okay, right? But if you want to take it as a whole chain, step by step, all the way from beginning to end, each chapter stands on its own.
Yeah, and that's been the feedback. Is I've had it read by people in their college kids all the way up to people in their 60s, their 70s, and everyone's had different feedback. But on some level, they've been able to utilize the book. And the younger ones, they've gone all the way through the book. They've seen the benefit of that. Whereas people much more further on in their careers and lives, they've been able to say, well, listen, I've always struggled in this particular area, the habits, or dealing with the truth, or dealing with resistance. This is a great chapter for me just to focus on alone, for sure.
That's great. All right. And so tell me your process. When somebody comes to work with you, what do they experience? How do you bring them from, through that? Your tagline is, your book is a competitor's guide to realizing your potential and your optimal self. Okay. So what's your process? How did you bring me from point A to point B?
Yeah, I love targeting really this gap that I alluded to before, because a lot of the time, when people come and sit down with me, they address, this is where I am and this is where I want to get to. But going back to what we were talking about before with honesty and conflict and that internal conflict specifically, sometimes we don't realize how much that internal conflict is actually playing a role. And I always joke with everybody when we first get started is that through the first couple sessions, we're going to discover that you're not quite as far along in your process as you thought you were. And secondly, you're much more capable than you thought you were too. So that gap that seems somewhat doable and manageable at first is actually much bigger, but it's bigger in a really exciting way. It's like, hey, we're not anywhere near as far along as you maybe thought you were. However, you are so much more capable than you're giving yourself credit for, because you've been limiting yourself with things such as limiting beliefs, inner conflict, and preventing yourself from really seeing what it is you're capable of achieving. So I love defining just the size of that gap through the first few sessions and getting my client comfortable with the work that's going to be required to close it. And that's okay, because as I use that term, the optimal self, when I do keynote speaking, I talk all the time about this notion that the optimal self is much like a northern star. You know, it can show us where we're going, it can guide us on our journey, but no human alive has ever reached the northern star. It's so far away that no one can actually touch it, but that's not prevented it from guiding people on their way to wherever it is they're going. And that's what the optimal self does for me. I get to say that and live that and embody that each and every day and use myself in many ways as an example to those that I speak to those that I coach, and say, listen, it's an ongoing process that you may never actually achieve, but the pursuit of the optimal self, that is why it's worth doing, because the benefits that come from that process are endless.
That's great. Loved it. I experienced it, y'all. You're good at it. Something you also emphasized with me is competitive, collaborative competition. That's been extremely helpful. I really encourage all of you listening to the podcast to probably phase the number one challenge, and that is better to go through your journey with a colleague, with a coach, with someone that can help you through it, help you think through things. And I have to recommend Steve in your work. It's fantastic. Help us land this. Give us any closing thoughts, anything you want our listeners to listen to. And of course, I ask you for your contact information here here at the end.
Yeah, I always love just parting with people and this is why I wrote my book, and it's why I do the work that I do today, is that sadly we live in a world where, you know, most of the time we're inundated with 4 or 5 reasons why not to do something versus why we should do something. And that's just kind of the way the world has evolved over time. And what I get to say confidently is that anybody that chooses to work with me, they've decided that despite the 4 or 5 reasons not to do something or why they can't achieve something, that they're focusing on the one reason. They're focusing on the one reason why they can, why it will happen. And I love helping people with that process, because it doesn't negate that there's still reasons why it cannot happen. But because we're focusing and prioritizing on why it can happen, the likelihood of those things being achieved is always greater just by simply looking at it through that lens. So I always impart that with people, because again, it means you go through life sometimes with your blinders on, focusing straight ahead, not listening to the noise around you sometimes, and doing what's best for you. And I talked about that right at the opening, is me nurturing myself. It's not selfish, it's nurturing myself. And I encourage people to do the same, just through thinking about what they can do versus why they can't do it.
That's great, man. Where can we find your book?
Yeah, there's 2 ways, Amazon, or you can actually just go to my website and you can buy it directly from me. I'll take the time to sign it, shoot you an individual message as well, just personalize it a little bit more, and it won't be at any extra cost than it would be for getting it on Amazon either. So feel free to do either one of those.
That's great. And you also do workshops, keynote speeches, come and do group workshops. You do reinforcement coaching, right? The whole works, guys. All right. So where do we how do we get a hold of you? How do we reach you? Where do we contact you?
Just come straight to me, steve@careercompetitor.com. That's steve@careercompetitor.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn, and you can also find me on the social networks such as Instagram @careercompetitor. Everything comes under Career Competitor at this point, but please just go ahead and reach out directly to me. Love to hear from you. I'm always going to make time for you. So I look forward to hopefully hearing from a few new people here.
Hey, Steve, thank you so much, man. Thank you for joining us. And thank all of you for joining us today. This is Winning in the Workplace. You can find us at winningintheworkplacepodcast.com. You can find me on my website at mauricetraining.com, and also my library, winningintheworkplace.com. Do not forget, to reach Steve, go to careercompetitor.com. It is a great resource, and fantastic to have him as your coach and as your mentor. So thanks for joining us, Steve. Appreciate it very much. All right, everybody, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being with us today. We invite you to come back next week, and we wish you a great Easter and have a wonderful, wonderful weekend.